My name is Roger Palmer. I'm a retired engineer living in Victoria, British Columbia. Today I want to talk about climate change hysteria. The popular press is overflowing with sensational but scary headlines. The hottest day on record. Sea levels are rising. Climate catastrophe. It's never been like this before. Climate change is an existential threat. We are declaring a climate emergency. It's man's fault. These hysterical messages are reinforced at disruptions organized by career demonstrators and professional protesters. Politicians are falling over themselves to agree with these claims and position themselves as the only viable saviors of mankind who are able to stop the climate from changing. You can't get elected if you are perceived as being soft on climate change. The authors of all this spurious noise, unfortunately, do not have a good understanding of science or the historical paleoclimatic record. These people are so arrogant and self-centered that they believe that man can control the solar system and somehow cancel the naturally occurring climate cycles so that the Earth's climate stays just the way they want it. Let's start the discussion by outlining a difference between weather and climate. When a person speaks about weather, they are referring to how the atmosphere is behaving over the short term, hours or days, and usually over a small area. The term climate refers to the statistics of weather over a defined large region over a long period of time, decades or more. The atmospheric characteristics being described include temperature, winds, moisture, clouds, and precipitation. But it is the temperature that most people seem to focus on. In the 1970s, the concern was about global cooling, but it has now shifted to global warming. An example of a weather statement is, it will be cooler and windy in downtown Ottawa tomorrow. An example of a climate statement is, North America will be warmer over the next 2 decades. Reliable equipment for measuring temperature has been available since the early 1800s, but unfortunately, the number and placement of temperature recording stations has changed considerably over time, so it is often difficult to get a complete and consistent record for a specific area. Temperature history for the period preceding the 19th century must be inferred by analyzing ice cores, tree growth rings, sediments, and corals. Ice cores, typically from Greenland, Antarctica, or the Arctic, are the most commonly used proxies, and it is possible to infer temperatures from thousands or millions of years ago. It is also possible to use ice cores to estimate the historical composition of the atmosphere. Although surface temperature is what humans actually feel on a day-to-day basis, that data can be contaminated by urban heat islands, and it is sometimes more meaningful to talk about the temperature of the troposphere, which is the lowest layer of the Earth's atmosphere, about 20 kilometers thick, and is where all the weather takes place. The clouds, precipitation, storms, winds, etc. Temperatures in the troposphere can be directly measured by balloon-borne radiosondes or inferred from satellite radiometry. Geological records show that the Earth's average temperature has varied cyclically for many millions of years. Sometimes it has been much hotter than today, and sometimes much cooler. This graph estimates variations in temperature during the last 500 million years. The Earth is approximately 4.5 billion years old. Predecessors of man have been on Earth for about 2.5 million years, and modern Homo sapiens have been around for about 200,000 years. Here is what the Earth's temperature has been doing over the past 500,000 years. And here is the temperature record for more recent times, the last 11,000 years, otherwise known as the Holocene. The Earth would be a much cooler place if it did not have an atmosphere. The atmosphere contains a number of gases that warm the Earth by what is called the greenhouse effect, which is when solar radiation from the sun can easily pass through the gases to the Earth, but outgoing infrared radiation from the Earth's surface is partially blocked from radiating off into space by these same gases. Further details of this mechanism are given in the references. There are several different greenhouse gases, but everyone seems to focus on just one of them, carbon dioxide, known as CO2. The concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is sometimes thought to be the driver of the Earth's temperature, but the geological record shows that there has been no correlation. The absolutely dominant greenhouse gas is water vapor. The Earth's glaciers and ice caps have grown and shrunk cyclically over time. The Earth recently exited the Little Ice Age and is currently warming, just as in previous cycles. There is definitely a new ice age coming, but none of us will live to experience it. We are currently in the neoglacial, which is a period between ice ages. As shown by the earlier graphs, the Earth's climate is not being driven by changes in the CO2 level. Indeed, changes in the atmospheric CO2 concentration are probably a result of changes in the Earth's temperature, as oceans and land masses release stored CO2 as a result of long-term temperature changes. As the glaciers and ice caps cyclically build and recede, there are corresponding changes in the sea level. The sea level has cyclically varied from today's levels by as much as plus or minus 200 meters, and these fluctuations are expected to continue for thousands of years to come. So, what is causing these long-term cyclical changes in the Earth's average temperature? A recently posted YouTube series entitled Paleoclimatology, Parts 1 through 3, give an in-depth analysis of the factors at work. Here is a summary of just some of the main factors. Continental drift, as a result of plate tectonics, has caused very long-term climate changes as the ocean's heat-carrying currents have been forced to take different paths. Milankovitch cycles, due to changes in the Earth's tilt, precession, and orbital eccentricity, and cyclical changes in the solar system's orbital alignments, have demonstrably produced corresponding changes in the Earth's climate over both the long term and the short term. Cyclical changes in the sun's total output radiated power. Cyclical changes in the sun's output spectral distribution, especially the ultraviolet component. Variations in the Earth's magnetic field, resulting in changes in the magnitude and position of the Earth's magnetosphere, which shields us from incoming cosmic particles and the solar wind. Variations in upper-level bacteria, which serve as nucleation sites for clouds and precipitation. Changes in the Earth's average cloud cover, as a result of changes in many of the factors just mentioned. Changes in the Earth's upper atmospheric wind currents that are used to distribute heat energy throughout the planet. Note that carbon dioxide concentration is not a significant cause of these natural cyclical changes. CO2 has some effect on long-term climate changes, but it is not the dominant determinant of global temperature. Then why are the agitators and politicians so obsessed with this? And why are they arbitrarily blaming man-made CO2 emissions from the combustion of fossil fuels on threatening disruptions to their climate nirvana? Perhaps there's a hidden agenda. Current proposals to decarbonize the Earth by eliminating fossil fuels will have a minor effect on climate, but will cause extraordinary economic harm. Maybe the true goal of the protesters is to destroy capitalism in the Western world. CO2 is a clear, odorless gas. Atmospheric CO2 levels have been much higher in the past and were sometimes much lower. CO2 is not a pollutant. It is essential to life. If the atmospheric CO2 concentration were to drop below 180 parts per million, the Earth's vegetation would not be able to survive, and the Earth would become a barren wasteland. There have been proposals to use large-scale geoengineering to alter the Earth's climate, such as by surrounding the Earth with orbiting reflective particles or mirrors. But such schemes are fraught with political as well as technical dangers. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, known as the IPCC, is often identified as the final authority when it gets to questions about the Earth's climate. However, the IPCC does not conduct research. It merely reviews papers in the field. And the IPCC should not be considered as being unbiased, because when they were created by the United Nations, they were specifically charged to investigate how mankind is causing the Earth's climate to change. In other words, the conclusion had already been reached that man was to blame before any investigations were performed. The IPCC is a political animal. Nothing is published before it has been approved by the representatives of all the participating countries to make sure that it aligns with their government's objectives and policies. The IPCC has published numerous forecasts of ever-increasing global temperatures being driven by rising atmospheric CO2 concentrations. But these are based on incomplete and inaccurate computer models, and they have all drastically overestimated the forthcoming temperature rise. These computer models ignore or inadequately account for many factors, including clouds and solar variations. It is claimed that 97% of scientists agree that man-made emissions of CO2 are having significant negative effects on the Earth's climate. However, consensus is not a valid way to conduct scientific research. Groupthink is a major problem in this field. Remember Galileo. He was able to prove that the Earth orbited the Sun rather than the other way around. But public opinion and the church forced him to recant his findings. Consensus overrules scientific evidence, just like it appears to be doing today. The Earth is getting warmer, and it will continue to do so until the temperature trend reverses sometime in the future, and we head into the next ice age. Mankind needs to recognize that we are an observer of naturally occurring climate cycles. There is very little that we can do to stop, change, or influence these cycles. The best thing that man can do is learn to adapt to these natural cycles. Stop wasting our money and damaging our economy on futile and inefficient schemes to reduce man's CO2 emissions in an attempt to appear to be trying to thwart what are perfectly natural cyclical changes of the Earth's climate. Learn to live with these changes. Mankind has to adapt. Have a nice day and enjoy the warmth while we have it. Here are links to references providing more details on many of these points.